Hello, and welcome to a new piece that we're going to be talking about this week, a caricature of a good friend of mine, Laura. Laura is the subject matter this week because it's her birthday, so happy birthday, Laura, and thank you for supplying a picture for the caricature study today. Now, before we get started talking about the drawing itself, a note on the music. Today we're listening to The Blue Danube by Johann Strauss. Okay, now on to the subject matter of the caricature itself. I can really only speak to my method, although I will tell you that I've studied this a little bit, and my method, from what I can tell, is very similar to a lot of the methods that have been used by the people that do caricatures at theme parks all over the place, like the Disney Worlds and places like that. The thing to probably understand about caricature, at least to try to simplify it as much as possible, is that caricature is meant to be a cartoonish version of a portrait, in the sense that you are going for a resemblance. It's the resemblance that sells the piece as being successful. But again, a more cartoonish version of it. So simplicity of line, simplicity of shape. And in understanding that is also understanding that when you simplify, that means everybody to a certain degree has certain similarities that you're going to be drawing over and over and over again. So, to put it in a simpler way, you're not drawing 50 different people with 50 different noses if you're working at a theme park doing caricatures all day long. What you're doing is you're learning to draw maybe 5 or 10 different types of noses, and when you see somebody sit down that has one of those types of noses, you just pick the one that you know how to draw that most resembles the person sitting in front of you, and that's what you put on the page. And you do that over several different features that make up the face. So you learn several different types of eyes, some bulgy, some inset, some wider set, etc., etc. Certain types of eyebrows, thick and thin. Same thing with the lips and the way certain mouths lie, and where cheekbones are pointy or chins are wide. 5 or 6 different types of all these different facial features that ultimately you can pick or choose and assemble them all together into the jigsaw puzzle that makes up the face that's sitting in front of you and that you're trying to represent on the paper here. Laura's a great example of this. She has a certain type of nose. She has a certain type of cheekbone. And I've already done this. I'd already gotten past this point, but there was a certain time where I wasn't happy with the cheekbones. As a matter of fact, it's happening right now. One of her cheekbones is pointier, and the other cheekbone is a little bit more rounded. And that doesn't really sit right if we're going for a resemblance, because she has a more symmetrical face in this. I have to choose one of those cheekbones, the one that best resembles her, based off the photograph that I have in front of me. And once I've made that decision as to which one looks more like her, then the other one has to go and it has to be redrawn to match. Same thing can be also said about her jawline, her chin, again, her eyes. You'll see me making these little tweaks as I go along here. And there's where I start dealing with the cheekbone and trying to get that in a little bit more symmetrical. And again, strive for that resemblance. And this is kind of maybe a great way to kind of speak to how I work. I start with very, very rough sketches that are meant to just establish, number one, composition, where I want this all to lay on the page, and number two, how those shapes are going to interact with each other. Caricature, by definition, is about exaggeration, but it's not random exaggeration. It's chosen exaggeration that's meant to help sell the resemblance that you're going for. And that means that it has to make sense in physical space. There has to be something that says to you that there's a skull underneath there, and that skull is normal, so to speak. That's a difficult thing to explain, but if the anatomy wasn't right, it would look awkward to the eye, and it wouldn't work, is I guess what I'm trying to say. Once I've established that, once I've got everything the way I like it, here's where I come in with the big, bold, black inks. This is just, again, another method that I like to work in. It goes back to the old comic book style days, and I really am a big fan of understanding good line weight to sell this picture, this good composition, so to speak. Big, bold outlines in the outer portion of this figure, especially in the hair. When we get into the more detailed facial features, we see skinnier, more defined, more refined line work in there. Again, it's just an aesthetic that I've always just really enjoyed. I think visually it looks very stimulating, and it's something that I try to emulate when I do my drawings as well, even though sometimes, again, I'm successful, sometimes I'm not. It's all about achieving a really, really good balance. And as I go through here, you'll notice that I'll also try to clean out my line work as I go along. There's a big, bold, thick outline on the hair, but it ends up on the left shoulder kind of pointy and not followed through the way it should. So I'll go back in and correct that a little bit later once I get some of this other line work laid in. The reason I do it like this also, I might just point out, is that when I'm laying in these big, bold outlines, I'm trying to get a really swift, singular motion out of it. A big, bold arc of the whole arm to try to give it a more fluid curve and maybe even breathe some life into it a little bit. I can go back and do corrections later, but that big sweeping motion, that naturalistic curve, is a difficult thing to achieve if I'm trying to make sure that line goes past the shoulder and everything like that. Again, I can always go back and play cleanup later, but getting that nice curve that feels natural is something that's almost more important, and the cleanup can kind of come later. Let's take a look at her expression here really quick. I'm going off the photograph here, obviously, but one of the things that's important to point out that we hear a lot about the concept of symmetry. The symmetry sells beauty, and especially in women, we want to seek out symmetry for the most part because we want, the subject matter of women here to be pretty, and we want to be complimentary, and all that makes sense. But symmetry can also be boring sometimes. So her eyebrows are a really good example of this. Her eyebrows are different on purpose. They're there to sell some sort of an emotional or an expression on her face. In this case, the smile. She has some slight wrinkles in the outside of her eyes as well to help, bring the smile up into her eyes also. But again, they're not identical on both sides of her face. Very, very few people are identical on both sides of their face, but more importantly, again, the eyebrows, the wrinkles, these things like this sell an expression here. And if her eyebrows were exactly the same on both sides, she would look boring or bored, or not lifelike. And again, if the idea here is to get a resemblance and to sell character, to sell emotion, well, we need something to help kind of break up the randomness here that might be boring otherwise. Okay, line work is done. Color is starting to go in here. And one of the things that might be interesting to point out is that when it comes to the coloring on this particular piece anyway, this digital medium was still relatively new to me. So a lot of this was largely experimentation. Again, some of this worked, some of it didn't. Some of this is breaking rules. That's what caricature is all about, is breaking rules and sometimes seeing that the experiment works, and sometimes, frankly, it doesn't. There were a lot of things here that I really think did work. There were a lot of things I could have pushed the envelope on a lot more and didn't. But as far as just some of the basics here, outlining out a color, filling in the rest, and then going back in and adding shadows later was my primary method of trying to figure out how to work in this digital medium. Flesh tones were something that was still relatively new to me, and so I was just kind of fumbling around in the dark here a little bit, but again, got some measured level of success. One of the things I really learned early on here, and you'll see it happen in just a second, is that working in a white background is something of a mistake. Moving to a gray background, or at least something surrounding your main colors in gray, makes it a lot easier to be able to tell the difference between the shadows and lights and those varying values that you're trying to put in to achieve this three-dimensional look that we're trying to go for in these particular types of pictures. So the gray is a mid-tone, and because it's a mid-tone, it doesn't lie to you about the brightness of any of the other colors that are surrounding it. White is such a bright, well, it is the brightest value, and as a result, it sitting next to other colors can fool the eye and create optical illusions you don't want otherwise. Now, I know this is probably looking really creepy right now, so this is how I initially learned to put in shadows. First of all, I think we can establish that these are reds, so we would call this a warm shadow, and I don't really do that much anymore. And a lot of my more recent works, I work in cooler shadows and a different method, but here's what's exactly happening. The reds are going in, and they're going in wherever I feel like the shadows should be. So under the eyes, defining the bridge of the nose, jawline, etc. You can see the light sources coming from the right and up above her a little bit. What's going to happen once I get all those shadows in is I'm going to lower the opacity. So even though it looks bold and red and almost bloody and gory right now, as soon as the opacity is lowered on this, it will actually look more natural. Although again, one could argue how natural a warm shadow is. In some cases, that makes perfect sense depending on lighting choices and things like that. But I work with cooler shadows now. It's just my preference. But you can see that now the opacity is lowered there. It doesn't look so bad. And when you partner it with the airbrushing that I put in here, which is the pinks that went in the forehead, cheeks, also in the chin and the point of the nose there, you'll see that it helps balance it out a little bit. Again, you can really also see some of my more primitive, so to speak, methods of working with this medium, in the sense that I'm dealing with all the shadows and the lights and the flesh tones before I go anywhere else, like her hair or her blouse or anywhere else on this piece. Now I work with all shadows at once across all the colors and all the values, just because it's just my preferred method to work. But when I first started working with this medium, flesh tones were really kind of new to me, and trying to make them look natural meant that I spent a lot of time focusing on them. And once I felt like I had those right, I might go look at some of the other elements of the piece, but the flesh was the main draw. Once I was somewhat satisfied with that, I'm going in here and starting to deal with the hair. And hair was really just a matter of taking this, okay, well, I have a blonde, I'm going to take a darker value of that particular color and light in and call it the shadow. And again, this isn't really good color theory. I've learned better methods since then about warms and cools and lighting versus multiplication methods of blending and things like that we can get into in other videos. But for right now, again, just kind of take this for what it is. The big takeaway from here, more than anything else, is the success, I think anyway, of the line work in here. I really love the lines of the bold black outline, and when you see me laying in the line work in the hair, I think it kind of really sells this piece as well. Again, the varying line weights, the way they kind of come together to sell the various strands of hair, I think just really works on the piece as a whole. One of the other parts of the line work that I really am very proud of, and we haven't seen it happen yet, is going to be the filigree and the detail work on the blouse. It's going to be coming up in a couple of seconds or so. When you see it start to go in, it's going to look like some stitching, some threading. There it goes in right now. And again, I'm pretty particularly proud of this because I love the filigree and the detail work. It was so much fun to put in, but it was also an echo of the gold that came from the hair. So I really feel like it lends some balance to the piece as well. Now, one last thing to mention here. A lot of work went into this. Laura was a real sport for letting me do this, so again, thank you to her. I've also put up a caricature here again because I felt like the caricature was something everybody seemed to really like in some of the other pieces that I've done on this channel. Please, if you like this caricature and you'd like to see more of them, put something in the comments. Let me know about caricatures you'd like to see in the future. Maybe a celebrity you'd like to see me do a caricature of. Or if you have any questions about technique or anything you'd like to have me talk about in these videos, add to the comments. I'm more than happy to reply or even bring it up in a video in the future. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the channel. It helps me out a lot, doesn't cost you a thing. And there's also a bell right next to it. If you ring the bell, you'll be notified when I put up a new video. Videos go up at least once a week. I'm going to be doing it even more often than that while I got a backlog. And I do have a backlog to get through before I start adding in a whole bunch of new stuff. I got a lot of ideas, some of them caricatures, some not. But again, if you leave some comments about what you like and you don't like, I'll try to make sure we get you taken care of. In the meantime, subscribe, come back, watch some new videos, and thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Take care. Have a great day. Goodbye.